You know, one of these days I'm gonna have to like finally get serious on this channel and make proper playlists. I know I at some point started making those and I got some of them added, but I need to get on there and manage it. I really do. And whenever I do make all the proper playlists that all the things need to go into, this one's gonna be a hard one to place because it's the Ablative Absolute. And you might think, well, what do you mean that'll be hard to place? That sounds like it would go in a playlist about ablatives. And it would, but it would also need to go into a playlist on participles and sort of maybe arguably on subordinate clauses. I mean, it's not a subordinate clause, but look, just let me get into it. The ablative absolute is a very special thing. It's not like any other use of the ablative. And it is a lot like a subordinate clause, but it's not technically a subordinate clause because an actual clause must have a finite verb in it. And the ablative absolute doesn't have that. And already, hopefully, you've got some like warning alarms going off. Like, what do you mean verbs in it? I thought ablatives were nouns. Well, the ablatives are nouns, but ablatives could also be adjectives or participles. And that's really what the ablative absolute is all about. You see, the ablative absolute is a fancy way the Romans have of showing circumstance. All right? It's about showing circumstance. And let me also give a little caveat here that the ablative absolute is actually a little more subtle and sophisticated. It can do some things other than showing circumstance. That's not, the best kind of complete picture of it, but it is the simplest one. So that's the one I'm going to go with. Or another way you could think of it is if a cum clause can do it, an ablative absolute can do it. And some of you might be thinking, well, then why wouldn't they just use a cum clause? Well, the fact is sometimes they do. And sometimes they use an ablative absolute. It depends on, who's talking, what they want to say. It might depend on how complicated of an idea they're trying to express is. Because if it's a pretty complicated one that's going to require a lot of words, I would say that you're more likely to see it as a cum clause. But if it's a fairly simple one, they might just do it with a couple of ablatives. Specifically, an ablative participle and an ablative noun. All right? This is a thing where you can show a circumstance with just literally an ablative noun and a participle that agrees with it, and that ablative noun and participle will kind of stand apart from the rest of the sentence. It'll just be a circumstance under which the rest of the sentence happens. Take this for instance. Another caveat here, I was trying to find the word trash can for this example, which apparently my Latin dictionary and all the other Latin dictionaries don't have a Latin word for trash can. So I'm using this hoping that it's a reasonable substitute. But I can find one of the Latin words for trash. Actually, there's a few words for trash, and this is probably, I think, the best one. So what this sentence says when you translate it is, with the trash thrown out, I found my cat in the bin. That is to say, the trash bin. But yeah, with the trash having been thrown out, I found my cat in the bin. So the main idea here is my main clause. And actually, the only full clause I have is the main clause. I found my cat, prepositional phrase, in the bin. But then I do have this circumstance under which I found her in the bin, which is after the trash had been thrown out. But rather than use a whole clause with a conjunction like postquam or cum or something like that, instead, I just have this ablative noun, the trash, and then an ablative participle describing thrown out, with the trash thrown out, or with the trash having been thrown out. Or if you don't want to be super literal about translating this as a participle, you could just go ahead and pretend like it was a cum clause and say, when the trash was thrown out, or after the trash was thrown out. And specifically, I would use when or after because this is a perfect participle, right? So that means that as a participle, it must have happened before the main clause verb happened. So the trash throwing out happened first, and then I found the cat. But technically, this is its own little thing that is separate from the grammar of everything else, which is not the way ablatives usually work, right? Usually, when I have an ablative, it is adverbial information that's somehow enhancing my verb because it's adverbial information. But here, this isn't going specifically with the verb. It's just extra information about the sentence in general, and it stands apart from everything else. So That's why it's called the ablative absolute. It is absolute, as in it doesn't interact with the rest of the sentence in any direct way. So yeah, so again, this says, with the trash having been thrown out, I found my cat in the bin. All right? Now, you can do this with any kind of participle. It doesn't have to be a perfect passive participle, although it very often will be. It could totally be a present participle, like this example down here, which says, with my cat sitting in the bin, my wife hurried to make an image. Well, I mean, I would say take a picture. And anybody who's been in my room will know that my computer background is, in fact, a cat in a trash can. But the point is I have, with the cat sitting in the bin, that's my ablative absolute. And you notice I actually have extra words here because I have my ablative noun, the cat, my ablative participle, sitting, and then there's a prepositional phrase that I stuck here in the middle. That's because this information goes along with the ablative absolute, so I just stick it in between my two ablatives. This also happens to be ablative, but that's unrelated to the absolute. That's just the prepositional phrase. And then my main idea is my wife hurried to take a picture. All right, or make an image, however you want to say. Now you'll notice this participle is present, like I said at the beginning, and that's because it didn't happen before the main clause. My cat was sitting in there at the same time that my wife was hurrying to take a picture of it, because it was super cute. And so since it was happening at the same time, I'll use a present participle, and that's usually what it's going to look like. It's usually going to look like this example that I started with, or this example down here. These are real typical examples of your ablative absolute, but I do want to emphasize that this could happen with any kind of participle. It's almost certainly going to be perfect or present, but theoretically it could be future. It totally could be. I need to make a correction on this real quick before I show you this last example. Hold on. Let me get the proper color for underlining my participle, because I realized I forgot to underline my future participle in this last example. Now I'm going to have to disinfect this later, because we're in the pandemic. I'm going to stick it in my pocket. All right. So I have an example up here with a future participle. With my cat about to jump into the bin, I got up to throw out the trash. The main idea here is that I got up, and I actually have what's it called? A subordinate clause over here that I'm not going to explain in this video. You'll have to watch other videos to see a full explanation of that. But I've got my main clause, which is I got up. I've got a subordinate clause that goes with I got up. But then as a circumstance for getting up to throw out the trash is my cat about to jump into the bin. For the record, this does not refer to my current cats. This refers to a past cat who loved getting into the garbage. She just loved garbage cans and the things that you find in the garbage too, so you got to watch out for that. But in this particular example, the reason why I've used a future participle is because she hadn't jumped into the trash yet when the main clause happened. So of course I got to use a future participle for that. But nevertheless, that does not change the fact that this is a circumstance under which something happened. All right? So that's what the ablative absolute is for. It's a circumstance under which something happens. It's not a full clause because you don't use a finite verb. Instead, you use a participle. Except when you don't use a participle. Usually, it's going to be a participle, and almost certainly it'll be perfect or present. But they could also make an ablative absolute with just two ablative nouns. This is the one that I think is going to really infuriate some people. Because you don't actually even have to have a participle. You could have something like this. With Leia as the leader, the mice will be captured. Of course, my main idea here is a really simple one. Just two words. Mures capientur, the mice will be captured, or the mice will be caught, with Leia as the leader. With Leia as the leader is my circumstance here, under which the mice will be caught. But there's no actual participle there. I just have two nouns. I have Leia, a noun. I have Duque, a noun. This is my current cat. She caught her first mouse a couple of weeks ago. We're very proud. All right? So yeah, so with Leia as leader. Now, if you want to know a little like philosophically behind what's going on here, it's sort of like there's an implied participle of being, with Leia being the leader. But the Romans don't have a participle, or not a present participle anyway, for the verb to be. So if they don't have it, if it doesn't exist, then it can't be in here. So they just put the two nouns with Leia as the leader. All right. A much more common way to see this is with the word consul. It's actually super common that they'll say something like this: with Luke as the consul, more friends were visiting. Oh, that should be plural. I'm just making all kinds of mistakes here. I'm going to out myself right now. That should be plural. Anyway, the point though that I want to emphasize is with Luke as consul. This is a phrase that you see all the time. They'll say, with Pompey as consul, or with, Fufidius and Fufius as consuls, or usually it's going to be two names. And actually, the reason for that is not so much because they care that you know who was in the leadership, but actually it's a really easy way to tell you what year it was. The Romans oftentimes will let you know what year it was by saying who was consul that year, because there were new consuls every year. If there's new consuls every year, it's an easy way to keep track of the years. Easy, supposing you know all your Roman consuls. Obviously you would, right? Come on, who doesn't know their Roman consuls? So you might have two nouns if your circumstance is with somebody or something being a thing, or if you're just trying to find out what year it was by knowing who was consul at the time. Right? One last thing though. It could also be an ablative noun and an ablative adjective. I underline this one in a different color because it's not a participle and it's not a noun, it's an adjective. But it is sort of the same as saying Lea Duque, with Leia as the leader. It's saying here with the cats unhappy, my feet again were being bitten. Actually, they're pretty good about not biting feet these days. But, as a grammatical example, it works. And it's still kind of the same thing where it's like there's an implied being in here that in Latin doesn't exist. So with the cat's unhappy, or with the cat's being unhappy, my feet were being bitten, of course, is my main idea. So that's how the ablative absolute works. Hopefully that's going to make sense to you guys. We're going to get tons of practice with it because it shows up in chapter 44, which we're about to read, or if you're watching this in the future, then you already saw it not only in chapter 44, but you've seen at least one of them in every chapter we've read since. And, if you're one of those advanced students who's, like reading Caesar or Sallust or something, then you just see them every time you read. The Romans love these things, especially if it's a circumstance that they can express in just a couple of words with a participle. So there you go. Stick this in your folder with all your ablative knowledge and with all your participle knowledge and with all your circumstantial knowledge. Just put it in there with all that, and I will see you guys again real soon to talk about more subordinate clauses. Bye.